The air was thick with the acrid tang of burning metal and the faint metallic scent of blood. Smoldering fragments of starships lay scattered across the pockmarked terrain like the broken pieces of some vast, celestial puzzle. Lieutenant Aaron Cole crouched low behind a jagged slab of alloy, his pulse steady despite the chaos around him. The battle had ended hours ago, yet the battlefield still groaned with the echoes of destruction. Engines sputtered, dying fires hissed in protest, and the distant cries of the wounded carried on the smoke-laden wind. Aaron adjusted the grip on his sidearm, the familiar weight of it grounding him. He scanned the horizon, his helmet visor casting faint flickers of data across his vision. The HUD was glitching, damaged like everything else. It showed no signs of movement, but Aaron knew better than to trust it. War had taught him that silence was often more dangerous than the cacophony of combat. He was alone. His platoon, what remained of it, had been recalled to the human base several clicks east. Aaron had stayed behind, ostensibly to search for survivors. In truth, he wasn't sure why he lingered. Perhaps it was the hollow pull of duty, or maybe the gnawing guilt of surviving when so many hadn't. Either way, he found himself picking through the wreckage, his boots crunching over scorched earth and shattered glass. A glint of light caught his eye, a faint shimmer amid the twisted remains of a downed Xeran assault craft. Aaron froze, every muscle taut, his instincts screaming a warning. Slowly, he shifted position, bringing the craft into sharper focus. The Xeran vessel, all sharp angles and alien grace, was embedded nose first into the ground, its hull blackened and torn. Most of its crew would be dead, he reasoned, if they hadn't already fled. Yet something had reflected the light. Something alive? Aaron crept closer, his footsteps deliberate and soundless. He circled the wreck, his weapon raised, his breath shallow. The glint came again, more distinct this time. A flicker of bioluminescent light, pulsing weakly like the last embers of a dying flame. He stepped over a crumpled piece of the hull and saw her. She was pinned beneath a fallen support beam, her lean, alien frame trembling with the effort to free herself. Her skin, an iridescent hue that shifted between cobalt and violet, was marred by deep gashes, oozing a faintly luminescent fluid. Her battle tattoos, once brilliant and imposing, were dulled with grime and exhaustion. Yet her eyes, slitted and glowing faintly, were fierce, locked onto Aaron with an intensity that made his heart skip. A Xeran warrior, alive. Aaron's training screamed at him to act. Xerans were enemies, efficient, deadly. He'd seen firsthand what they could do, their precision strikes and brutal efficiency carving through human ranks like a blade through silk. Every instinct told him to finish it now, to put a round through her head and be done with it. But he hesitated. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, her strength fading with each passing moment. She didn't plead. She didn't beg. Instead, she held his gaze, unflinching, as if daring him to act. Her defiance, even in the face of death, was almost admirable. Almost. Aaron lowered his weapon, but didn't holster it. "You're stuck," he said, his voice low and steady. The words felt strange in the suffocating silence, as though they didn't belong. She didn't reply, but her expression shifted, a flicker of confusion breaking through her stoicism. She didn't understand him. Of course, she wouldn't. Aaron glanced at the beam pinning her. It was heavy, twisted with cables and shards of metal. She wouldn't free herself, not without help. His gut churned as he considered his options. Leave her, and she would die slowly, crushed under the weight of her own ship. Kill her, and she'd be spared the suffering. Help her, and... help her? Damn it, he muttered under his breath. He slung his sidearm back into its holster and moved closer, hands raised to show he meant no harm. Her eyes narrowed, her fingers twitching toward the blade strapped to her thigh, but she made no move to stop him. "Hold still," he said, gesturing to the beam. He didn't know if she understood the words, but his intentions should be clear enough. He braced his hands against the cold metal and pushed. It didn't budge. The Xeran warrior's head tilted slightly. A faint, almost imperceptible shift. Was she amused? Irritated? He couldn't tell. Gritting his teeth, Aaron adjusted his stance and tried again, leveraging his weight against the beam. This time, it shifted an inch, then two. The Xiran winced, her body tensing as the pressure on her leg changed. Almost there, he grunted, more to himself than to her. He shoved harder, his muscles straining until, finally, the beam rolled free with a resounding thud. Aaron stumbled back, panting as the warrior slumped to the ground, her strength giving out. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Aaron's heart thundered in his chest as he watched her, waiting for some sign of retaliation. Instead, she simply lay there, her breathing shallow but steady. Her glowing eyes closed briefly, then opened again, fixing on him with a look he couldn't quite decipher. "You're welcome," he said dryly, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. She responded in her own tongue, a string of harsh, melodic syllables that Aaron couldn't hope to understand. Yet, there was something in her tone. Not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As Aaron stood there, the weight of his actions settling over him, one thought loomed above the rest. What now? The war hadn't ended. His duty hadn't changed. And yet, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he'd just saved the life of an enemy soldier. The mystery of her survival and her defiance gnawed at him, demanding answers he wasn't sure he wanted to find. Somewhere in the distance, the rumble of approaching engines broke the fragile silence. Reinforcements. Human or Xiran, Aaron didn't know. All he knew was that time was running out, and his decision would have consequences. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice clipped. He mimed the action for good measure. The Xiran warrior's lips curled into the faintest shadow of a smile, or was it a snarl, before she pushed herself upright, her movement slow and deliberate. Her injuries were severe, but she nodded as if to say she'd manage. Aaron sighed. "Let's move." And so, against every rule, every instinct, and every shred of logic, Aaron Cole and his unexpected companion vanished into the ruins, shadows amid the wreckage of a war that refused to end. The air was colder here, away from the smoldering wreckage and the death cries of engines. Shadows sprawled long and deep, fractured by the unnatural angles of shattered steel. Aaron led the way, his grip firm on his sidearm, its muzzle tipped downward but ready to rise in a heartbeat. Behind him, the Xiran warrior moved with measured care, her limping gait belying the ferocity that still lingered in her glowing eyes. Even wounded, she was a presence, unyielding, alien, and impossible to ignore. Aaron's steps slowed as they approached the remains of a massive transport ship, its hull split wide like a wound gaping under the ash-gray sky. The wreckage provided shelter of a sort, cover from drones and scouts that might still sweep the area. Aaron signaled a halt, his fingers a silent command. She stopped, watching him with the stillness of a predator sizing up prey. "Here's as good a spot as any," Aaron muttered, lowering himself to one knee. He pulled a battered canteen from his belt and took a cautious sip, then offered it toward her. The Xiran hesitated, her bioluminescent markings flickering faintly in rhythm with her labored breaths. Finally, she took the canteen with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Her lips parted to speak, a low cadence of words in her language, liquid and sharp, a melody of defiance even in the unfamiliar tongue. "Still not getting it," Aaron said, leaning back against the wreckage. "You're going to have to try harder if you want me to understand." She regarded him for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. Then, with visible effort, she reached into a compartment on her armor. Aaron stiffened, his hand twitching toward his holster. But instead of a weapon, she pulled out a small, intricate device, a circular disc no larger than his palm, its surface alive with shifting patterns of light. "What's that?" Aaron asked, his voice tight. She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed a sequence of points on the device. It emitted a soft hum, and then a holographic projection flared to life above it, a vivid sphere of interwoven lines, pulsing faintly like a living thing. The sight froze Aaron in place. He'd seen Xiran tech before, but this was different. It wasn't just advanced, It was deliberate, purposeful, a tool built for something beyond destruction. The warrior spoke again, her voice low and urgent. She gestured to the projection, her movements precise but restrained. Aaron frowned, trying to piece together her meaning. "You want me to look at that?" he guessed. She shook her head sharply, frustration flashing across her features. Then she pointed to him, to the projection, and then in the direction of the distant horizon, where the jagged remnants of the Ziran war front loomed like broken teeth. Understanding began to dawn, unwelcome and heavy. "You want me to take this somewhere? To them?" He gestured vaguely toward the horizon. Her nod was slow but resolute. Aaron's pulse quickened. "You're kidding, right? That's not just suicide, that's—" He trailed off, staring at the hologram again. The patterns were shifting now, rearranging into shapes he couldn't decipher, but that hinted at something vast, something beyond the scope of his understanding. Her voice cut through his thoughts, soft but insistent. She pointed again, this time pressing the device into his hands. Her skin was cool against his, and for a moment he could feel the faint tremor of her exhaustion beneath her composure. She spoke again, one word rising above the rest, a sound like Keleth. "What does that mean?" Aaron asked. "Is that your name? The name of someone I'm supposed to find?" She didn't answer, but her expression was enough. It wasn't just a name, it was a plea. Aaron's mind raced. He'd just saved her life, and now she was asking for something far greater in return. If he agreed, it would mean betraying every protocol, every ounce of training hammered into him over years of war. Worse, it would mean leaving himself vulnerable, not just to the Zirans, but to his own people. He could already picture Colonel Lynn's reaction, the cold fury in his eyes as he labeled Aaron a traitor. But then he looked at her again. The glow of her markings was dim now, fading with her strength. She wasn't just asking for help. She was trusting him, an enemy, with something that clearly mattered more than her own survival. Why? What could possibly be worth that kind of risk? The distant hum of engines reached his ears, faint but growing louder. Human, Ziran. It didn't matter. They needed to move. "Fine," Aaron said, his voice clipped. He pocketed the device, its weight feeling heavier than it should. "But if this gets me killed, I'm blaming you." For the first time, her lips curved into something like a smile, or perhaps it was just a shadow of relief. Either way, Aaron didn't have time to dwell on it. He hauled her to her feet, her arms slung over his shoulder to support her weight. She winced, but didn't protest as they began to move, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. The engines grew louder behind them, joined by the metallic clatter of something mechanical. Drones. Aaron swore under his breath, quickening their pace. The terrain was rough, uneven, every step a potential misstep. But the Ziran's grip on his shoulder remained firm, her determination matching his own. "Stay quiet," he whispered, though he doubted she understood. He led them toward a jagged crevice in the earth, a natural trench carved by the crash of some long-destroyed vessel. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. They slipped into the shadows just as the first drone passed overhead, its searchlights slicing through the darkness. Aaron pressed his back against the wall of the crevice, the Ziran beside him, both of them holding their breath as the mechanical whine grew louder, then began to fade. Only when silence returned did Aaron allow himself to exhale. "This is insane," he muttered, his words more for himself than for her. He glanced at the device in his pocket, its presence a constant reminder of the choice he'd just made. Whatever this mission was, it was far from over, and the questions it raised were only beginning to take shape. The dim light of pre-dawn painted the ruins in hues of gray and deep blue, casting long, uncertain shadows that seemed alive with potential threats. Aaron's grip on his sidearm was steady, but his thoughts were anything but. Each step forward into the jagged terrain felt like walking a razor's edge, the weight of the Ziran's strange device pressing against his chest, tucked into his tactical vest. It seemed heavier than its physical mass, as though it carried with it a gravity of purpose he couldn't yet comprehend. Behind him, the Ziran warrior moved with deliberate care, Her injuries, though severe, hadn't slowed her resolve. She kept pace with a quiet determination, her sharp eyes scanning the environment with an efficiency that unnerved Aaron. Even wounded, she was formidable, and she was watching him closely as though measuring his every move. They had reached the edge of the battlefield, where the wreckage began to give way to dense thickets of twisted, ash-coated vegetation. The air was heavier here, thick with the lingering stench of war, mingled with the faint, metallic tang of whatever toxins the Zirin engines had left behind. Aaron stopped, holding up a hand. The Zirin froze, her glowing eyes narrowing as she followed his gaze. There, not 50 meters ahead, was a patrol. Human soldiers. 2 figures in exo-armor, their massive augmented frames nearly silent as they moved with the precision of machines. Each carried a pulse rifle, its barrel glowing faintly with residual energy. Aaron's breath caught. He ducked low, motioning for the Zirin to do the same. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before mirroring his movement. They crouched behind a cluster of jagged rocks, their forms blending into the debris. This wasn't part of the plan, Aaron muttered under his breath. Not that there had been much of a plan to begin with. He glanced at the Zirin, her expression impassive, but her body coiled, ready to spring if needed. She wouldn't hesitate to fight if it came to that, he realized, and if she fought, it would be over for both of them. The patrol drew closer, their voices crackling over an open comm channel. Aaron strained to make out the words. Nothing left here. Command says sweep and return. Sweep for what? We've already picked this place clean. Orders are orders. Just keep your eyes open. Aaron's mind raced. If the soldiers spotted them, there would be no talking his way out of it. Harboring an enemy combatant, carrying unknown alien tech, he'd be branded a traitor before he could explain himself. The thought turned his stomach. The Zirin shifted beside him, her gaze fixed on the soldiers. Aaron caught the movement and placed a firm hand on her arm, shaking his head. Her expression darkened, but she stayed still. The soldiers passed within 20 meters, their footsteps crunching softly over the debris-strewn ground. One of them paused, scanning the horizon with a faint whir of servos. Aaron's heart pounded in his ears. He forced himself to remain motionless, even as the tension coiled in his muscles screamed for release. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the soldier turned away. Nothing here, he said. Let's move. Aaron didn't breathe until the patrol's silhouettes vanished into the mist. Only then did he release his grip on the Zirin's arm. She pulled away, her eyes flashing with a mixture of irritation and perhaps a grudging acknowledgement. You're welcome, Aaron said, his voice low but tinged with exasperation. She responded in her language, the sharp syllables incomprehensible but unmistakably defiant. They pressed on, moving deeper into the wilderness. The terrain grew steeper, the ground uneven, and riddled with jagged outcroppings. Aaron's legs burned with the effort, but he kept going, driven by the weight of the device and the questions it posed. What was it? Why had she given it to him? And why did she trust him, an enemy, to see it delivered? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp sound, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the air itself. Aaron stopped, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. The Zirin stiffened beside him, her glowing eyes narrowing as she scanned their surroundings. The sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't mechanical, Aaron realized. It was something else, something alive. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and a faint, pulsating light emanated from the earth, tracing veins of energy that spiderwebbed outward in every direction. What the hell is this? Aaron muttered, stepping back. The Zirin didn't answer. Her focus was entirely on the ground, her expression shifting from caution to something closer to fear. The light intensified, and with it came a low, resonant hum that seemed to bypass Aaron's ears and vibrate directly in his chest. The Zirin shouted something in her language, her voice sharp with urgency. She grabbed his arm and pulled him back just as the ground erupted in a column of searing light. Aaron shielded his eyes, his vision swimming with afterimages. When he blinked them away, he saw it. Rising from the earth was a structure. its surface smooth and impossibly black, absorbing the faint light of dawn. It was monolithic, featureless, save for the faint, shifting patterns that danced across its surface like liquid starlight. The Xiran stepped forward, her movements cautious but deliberate. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the structure's surface. The patterns shifted at her touch, coalescing into symbols that Aaron couldn't decipher, but that seemed to hold meaning for her. She turned to him, her expression urgent, and spoke a single word. Keleth. Aaron stared at her, then at the structure. You're saying this is connected to that thing you gave me? He pulled the device from his vest, holding it up. It pulsed faintly in response, its patterns aligning with those on the monolith. The Xiran nodded, her gaze intense. Aaron's grip tightened on the device as the weight of the moment settled over him. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a message or a mission. It was something far larger, far more dangerous than he'd anticipated, and it was just beginning. The monolith pulsed faintly against the dim backdrop of the early morning. Its surface, smooth as obsidian but alive with shifting patterns, seemed to hum in rhythm with the alien device Aaron held in his hand. The faint energy emanating from both created an unsettling vibration that thrummed through his chest, a silent reminder that whatever they had stumbled upon was far beyond his understanding. The Xiran warrior, her bioluminescent markings now glowing brighter than before, stood transfixed by the monolith. Her eyes reflected the alien light, and her lips moved in what Aaron assumed was her native tongue, a whispered chant, or perhaps a plea. It wasn't directed at him, but the gravity in her tone made his pulse quicken. Aaron stepped closer, his boots crunching softly against the jagged terrain. "What is it?" he asked, though he doubted she'd answer in a way he'd understand. Still, his voice cut through the growing tension, a tether to something human amid the unknown. She turned to him, her expression both fierce and pleading. Gesturing to the device in his hand, she spoke one word with more clarity than he'd yet heard. Keleth. There it was again. That name, or was it a concept? A place? Aaron's frustration boiled beneath the surface, but he forced himself to stay calm. He studied the monolith, his military instincts pushing past the fear to analyze. It wasn't just a structure, it was a beacon, or perhaps a doorway. The patterns on its surface were too deliberate to be decorative. They were signals, instructions, something meant to be deciphered. The device in his hand pulsed again, its light intensifying in sync with the monolith. Aaron felt a pull, not physical but visceral, as though the two were connected by an unseen thread. He raised the device, angling it toward the monolith. The Xiran's breath hitched, her attention snapping to his movement. "You want me to use this?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded sharply, her gaze unflinching. Aaron hesitated. His mind raced with the possibilities. Was this some kind of weapon? A signal to call reinforcements? Whatever it was, activating it could have consequences far beyond anything he could anticipate. But the urgency in her eyes left him with little choice. He could either trust her or walk away, and walking away wasn't an option anymore. Taking a deep breath, he pressed his thumb against the central node of the device. The reaction was immediate. A beam of light shot from the device, striking the monolith with a soundless impact that reverberated through the air. The patterns on the monolith flared to life, cascading outward in a dazzling display of geometric precision. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the monolith began to shift, its surface peeling back to reveal an inner core of luminous energy. Aaron staggered back, his heart pounding. What the hell is happening? The Xiran stepped forward, her movements reverent. She spoke again, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Though he couldn't understand the words, her tone carried a weight that silenced his protests. She gestured for him to follow. "Oh no," Aaron muttered, even as his feet moved of their own accord. "This is insane." They stepped closer to the monolith's core. The energy within was mesmerizing, a swirling vortex of light and shadow that seemed to bend reality itself. Aaron felt a strange pull, as though the core were drawing him in, stripping away his sense of self and replacing it with something vast and incomprehensible. Then he saw them, shadows within the light, figures humanoid but indistinct, moving with a fluid grace that defied logic. They weren't solid, not entirely, but their presence was undeniable. Aaron froze, every instinct screaming at him to run, but his body refused to obey. The Xiran spoke again, her voice rising in a crescendo. One of the figures turned toward her, its form shifting as though it were adjusting to her presence. The patterns on the monolith shifted again, rearranging into something that resembled language. Aaron squinted, his brain struggling to make sense of it. And then, impossibly, he did. The symbols weren't static. They were alive, morphing into shapes and words that his mind could process. A phrase emerged, simple yet profound. The bridge awaits. Aaron's breath caught. The bridge? What bridge? The Xiran's gaze shifted to him, her expression unreadable. She reached out, her hand brushing against his. The contact was brief but electric, a spark that sent a flood of images rushing through his mind. A massive construct floating in the void, its spires reaching toward distant stars. A war, ancient and devastating, and a figure standing at the heart of it all bathed in light. Aaron staggered, his vision clearing as the images faded. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward the monolith's core. The message was clear. The answers lay within. Aaron's pulse raced. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn back, to abandon this madness and return to the relative safety of the battlefield. But something deeper held him in place. A curiosity, a need to understand. He'd spent years fighting without questioning why, following orders without knowing the truth behind them. Now, faced with the unknown, he couldn't turn away. "Fine," he said, his voice barely audible. "Let's see where this bridge leads." He stepped forward, the Xiran close behind. Together, they entered the monolith's core, the light enveloping them in a blinding cascade. The world dissolved around them, replaced by a vast expanse of stars and shifting light. Aaron felt weightless, unmoored from time and space. And then he heard it. A voice, deep and resonant, speaking not in words, but in emotions, in truths that bypassed language entirely. It was a warning and a call to action, a revelation that left Aaron reeling. When the light faded, he found himself back in the wilderness, the monolith silent and dormant once more. The Xiran stood beside him, her expression grim. Whatever had just happened, it had changed everything. Aaron looked at her, the weight of understanding settling over him like a shroud. This war, it's not what we think it is it? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The truth was already sinking in. The bridge had been crossed, and there was no going back. The wasteland stretched in silence around Aaron and the Xiran warrior, the monolith's dormant form towering behind them like a monument to a history he could only begin to grasp. The chill of the evening breeze stung his skin, but he barely noticed. His mind raced with fragments of the vision he'd seen, a bridge reaching into the void, ancient and shimmering, and the warning that had come with it. "What now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His words hung in the air, unanswered. The Xiran's glowing eyes were fixed on the horizon, her expression a mask of grim determination. She had not spoken since they emerged from the monolith's core, but Aaron could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing against the silence. Finally, she turned to him and spoke a single word. "Prepare." Aaron frowned, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Prepare for what? You can't just drag me into this and expect me to play along without some answers." Her gaze softened for the first time, the hard lines of her face giving way to something that resembled pity. She gestured toward the monolith, and then toward the device still clutched in his hand. "The bridge," she said, her voice halting but deliberate. "It is open. They come." Aaron's stomach tightened. "They? Who's coming?" She didn't respond directly. Instead, she reached for the device, her fingers brushing against his, as she guided it toward the ground. Aaron hesitated, but allowed her to take it. She knelt, pressing the device against the earth. A faint glow spread outward, tracing patterns in the soil that mirrored the monolith's shifting light. As the patterns grew, they revealed a map, not of the terrain around them, but of the stars above. Aaron stared at the glowing constellation. He recognized some of the patterns, but others were alien, unfamiliar. At the center of the map was a point of convergence, a nexus where lines of light intersected. It pulsed with an ominous rhythm. "What is that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The Xiran stood, her expression unreadable. "The gate," she said. "Your people call it salvation. Mine call it destruction." Aaron's breath caught. "You're saying this war, everything we've been fighting over, it's about that?" She nodded. "Not just war, all worlds. It is the same. The gate chooses, it divides." Aaron shook his head, struggling to process her words. The visions he'd seen began to make a chilling kind of sense. The bridge wasn't a path to peace or victory. It was something far more dangerous, a tool of unimaginable power, one that could reshape entire civilizations or destroy them. "Why me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you give this to me?" The Xiran's gaze met his, her luminous eyes unwavering. "Because you see, you question. The gate does not favor those who follow blindly." Aaron's hands trembled. He looked down at the glowing patterns, the nexus pulsing steadily. "So what happens now? Do we destroy it? Shut it down?" Her silence was answer enough. Destroying the gate wasn't an option. It was too vast, too interconnected with the fabric of the universe itself. The only path forward was through it. Aaron took a shaky breath. "Fine," he said. "We cross it. But what happens on the other side?" The Xiran's expression hardened. Judgment. The journey to the Nexus was harrowing. The map led them through treacherous terrain, where the remnants of the battlefield gave way to uncharted wilderness. Every step felt like a test, the weight of the device in Aaron's hand a constant reminder of what lay ahead. The Xiran moved with purpose, her injuries seeming to fade as they drew closer to their destination. The first sign of the gate's presence was the light. It pierced the sky like a beacon, its radiance defying the darkness. As they approached, the air grew thick with energy, each breath charged with static. Aaron could feel it in his bones, a vibration that resonated with the device and the monolith's patterns still etched into his mind. When they reached the gate, Aaron stopped in his tracks. It was vast, a structure of impossible scale that seemed to stretch into infinity. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting and distorting the world around it. At its center was the bridge, a narrow path of light that extended into the void. Aaron's mouth went dry. "This is it, isn't it?" The Xiran stepped forward, her posture unwavering. She placed a hand on the gate's surface, and it rippled like water. Turning to Aaron, she held out her other hand. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to turn back, to leave this place and forget everything he'd seen. But deep down, he knew there was no going back. The bridge had been crossed the moment he'd taken the device from her. Taking her hand, he stepped onto the bridge. The crossing was unlike anything Aaron had ever experienced. The void around them was alive with light and sound, a symphony of creation and destruction that defied comprehension. Each step felt both infinite and instantaneous, as though time itself had folded in on itself. As they neared the other side, the light intensified, resolving into shapes and forms. Aaron saw glimpses of worlds, some thriving, others desolate. He saw faces, human and alien, their expressions a mixture of hope and despair. And he saw the gate, present in every vision, a constant thread connecting all things. When they reached the end of the bridge, they found themselves in a chamber of pure light. At its center was a figure, its form indistinct but radiating an overwhelming presence. Aaron felt its gaze on him, not with eyes but with something deeper, a scrutiny that pierced his very soul. The Xiran knelt, her head bowed. Aaron remained standing, his heart pounding. The figure's voice filled the chamber, not in words, but in understanding. The gate tests. It judges. What will you choose? Aaron swallowed hard. He didn't know the answer. All he knew was that the choice would shape not just his future, but the future of countless worlds. He looked at the Zyron, then back at the figure. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, and he made his choice. When Aaron opened his eyes, he was back in the wilderness. The gate was gone, leaving only a faint glow in the sky where it had been. The Zyron stood beside him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes filled with something new. Hope. "Did we do it?" Aaron asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded. "The bridge is closed. For now." Aaron exhaled, the weight of the journey finally lifting. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, he felt ready to face it. In the desolate hours before dawn, under a fractured sky lit by the intermittent glow of distant explosions, Dr. Adrian Holt moved with practiced efficiency through the labyrinth of the field hospital. The air was a cacophony of suffering, human soldiers groaning in pain, the hum of malfunctioning generators, and the sharp, urgent orders of medics struggling to stave off death. Each noise merged into a grim symphony that had long since numbed Adrian to its meaning. Yet tonight, something felt different, a tension that pressed against the skin, as though the air itself held its breath. Adrian's hands, steady and sure, worked to stitch a soldier's torn flesh. The man's face was a mask of pain, his cries subdued by sedation. Around them, the makeshift triage unit was a tableau of controlled chaos. Blood smeared the steel gurneys, and the chemical tang of antiseptics mixed with the metallic bite of fear. Adrian finished his sutures and stepped back, signaling for the nurse to take over. He was needed elsewhere, always elsewhere. But as he turned, the hum of the hospital generator faltered, plunging the space into an uneasy semi-darkness. Emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. A voice crackled over the comms, a report of an anomaly just outside the perimeter. Adrian ignored it at first. Anomalies were common in the war. Glitches in the technology, stray creatures caught in the crossfire. Nothing he needed to concern himself with. But then, the word came again, this time laced with urgency. Oran presence suspected. Oran. The word sent a ripple through the room, like a ghost brushing over each occupant. Adrian froze, the half-dried blood on his gloves forgotten. The Orans were more than an enemy. They were enigmas wrapped in fearsome power. Their warriors, clad in chitin-like exoskeletons that shimmered with iridescence, were the stuff of human nightmares, fast, precise, and seemingly indomitable. Yet they bled like any living creature, a fact Adrian had reminded himself of countless times as he stitched up the survivors of their attacks. Something compelled him to leave his station, a whisper of instinct he couldn't ignore. He discarded his gloves and grabbed a medkit, weaving his way through the crowded corridors until he emerged into the cold, open air. The battlefield stretched out before him, a wasteland of blackened earth and jagged craters. Searchlights swept the area, their beams piercing the smoky haze. And then he saw it. A figure crumpled near the edge of the perimeter, half hidden in the shadow of a fallen transport vehicle. Adrian's breath hitched. The figure was unmistakably Oran. Even from a distance, the iridescent sheen of its skin caught the light, a kaleidoscope of colors that defied human comprehension. He hesitated, the weight of protocol and self-preservation pressing down on him. The standing order was clear: no aid to the enemy. But then the figure moved, a weak, almost imperceptible twitch. Against every rational impulse, Adrian found his feet carrying him forward. As he approached, the details sharpened. The Oran was female, at least he assumed so, based on the subtle contours of her form. Her exoskeleton was cracked and splintered, a luminous fluid seeping from the wounds. Her breathing was shallow, a rasping sound that spoke of collapsed lungs and imminent death. Adrian knelt beside her, his gaze tracing the alien symmetry of her face. Her eyes, half-lidded and unfocused, flickered open for a moment. They were unlike any he'd seen before. Deep pools of silver, flecked with streaks of black that seemed to shift and swirl. "Help me," she whispered, the words startlingly clear despite her injuries. Her voice was low, resonant, and layered, as though multiple tones spoke in harmony. It sent a shiver down Adrian's spine. He hesitated, his hands hovering over her wounds. This wasn't just a breach of orders. This was treason. Yet, as he stared at her, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this war didn't have to end in annihilation for one side or the other. Hope that beneath the chitin and claws, there was something worth saving. "Stay with me," he murmured, opening the medkit. His hands moved instinctively, assessing her injuries. The physiology was alien, the internal structure a puzzle he had no time to solve, but he could see the essentials: a punctured lung, fractures in the exoskeleton, and a severed artery that threatened to drain her life away. Improvising, he used a sealing agent designed for human wounds, praying it wouldn't cause a reaction. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "You," she began, her voice faltering. "Why?" Adrian didn't answer. He didn't have one. The procedure was a blur of adrenaline and instinct. His training as a surgeon guided him, but he was acutely aware of how much he didn't know. Her blood, if that's what it was, reacted strangely to the human tools, coagulating in patterns that defied logic. Her body temperature fluctuated wildly, and her breathing alternated between shallow gasps and eerie stillness. At one point, he thought he'd lost her, but a faint pulse under his fingers spurred him to continue. When it was over, Adrian sat back, his chest heaving. The Oran's breathing had steadied, though it was still faint. Her eyes fluttered open again, and this time they seemed to focus on him, studying him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "You," she said again, the word heavy with meaning he couldn't grasp. Then, her eyes closed, and she slipped into unconsciousness. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, the reality of what he'd done sinking in. He had crossed a line, one he couldn't uncross. Around them, the battlefield remained eerily quiet, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a comm unit crackled with static, a voice calling his name. But Adrian didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the alien warrior, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. Who was she? Why had she been left behind? And what had he just set into motion? The Oran warrior stirred, her iridescent skin shimmering faintly under the dim light that filtered through the torn canopy above. Dr. Adrian Holt stood over her, his pulse thrumming in his ears as he processed the surreal tableau. A war raged outside these makeshift walls, a war that should have rendered this moment impossible. Yet here he was, alone in a hidden alcove within the field hospital, guarding an enemy whose very presence defied every protocol he had sworn to uphold. Adrian's mind was a maelstrom of conflict. Minutes ago, he had risked everything to save her, abandoning duty and logic in a single act of defiance. Now, as the reality of his decision settled, the weight of its consequences began to press on him. If discovered, he would be branded a traitor. Yet, as his gaze lingered on her fractured exoskeleton and the faint rise and fall of her chest, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The faint hum of machinery brought Adrian's attention back to the room. He adjusted the medical scanner he had cobbled together from salvaged parts, its screen displaying a chaotic swirl of data he barely understood. The Oran's physiology was an enigma, a delicate balance of organic and crystalline structures that seemed both familiar and alien. He had stabilized her, but her recovery was far from certain. Every decision he'd made had been a gamble, and he knew he was playing a game he didn't fully understand. "You shouldn't have done it." The voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. Adrian turned sharply to see Commander Strickland standing in the doorway, her uniform crisp, despite the chaos of the camp. Her eyes, cold and unyielding, bore into him with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Adrian's heart sank. He had hoped for more time to think, to plan, to figure out what came next. Now, it seemed, time had run out. "She's alive," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I couldn't just let her die." Strickland stepped into the room, her boots clicking against the metallic floor. She stopped a few feet from the table where the Oran lay, her gaze flicking over the alien's form with thinly veiled disgust. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she demanded. "This isn't some wounded soldier you can patch up and send on their way. She's the enemy, Holt, a weapon. You've jeopardized the entire operation by bringing her here." Adrian bristled, but held his ground. "She's not a weapon," he said. "She's a person, and she was dying." "And what happens when she wakes up?" Strickland countered, her tone icy. "Do you think she'll thank you for saving her? Do you think she'll spare us when her kind return?" Adrian didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was the look in her eyes when she had asked for his help, a look of desperation and vulnerability that had cut through the noise of war and reached something deep within him. "I'll take responsibility for her," he said finally. "Whatever happens, it's on me." Strickland's expression hardened. "You don't have the authority to make that call." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a dangerous whisper. "I should report this. I should have you court-martialed, but for some reason I'm giving you a chance to fix this. End it now, Holt, before it's too late." Adrian's jaw tightened. He glanced down at the Oran, her features peaceful in unconsciousness, and knew he couldn't do it. "I can't," he said quietly. "She's under my care." Strickland's eyes narrowed. "Then you've chosen your side." She turned sharply on her heel and strode out, leaving the air crackling with unspoken threats. For a moment, Adrian stood in silence, the weight of her words settling over him. Then, a faint sound drew his attention. He looked down to see the Oran's eyes open, their silver depths focused intently on him. "She does not trust you," the Oran said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper. Adrian startled, both at her sudden wakefulness and the clarity of her speech. "But you chose differently." Adrian hesitated, unsure how to respond. "You're awake," he said finally. "That's a good sign." The Oran's gaze didn't waver. "Why did you save me?" It was the question he had been asking himself since the moment he'd knelt beside her on the battlefield. "Because I could," he said honestly. "Because someone had to." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "A rare choice among your kind." Adrian frowned. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zale," she replied. "Of the Vale Guard." The name meant nothing to him, but the way she said it carried a weight that suggested it should. "I'm Adrian," he said. "Dr. Adrian Holt." Zale's gaze softened, and for a moment, the tension in the room eased. But then her expression darkened, and she shifted slightly, wincing as pain lanced through her. "They will come for me," she said, "and for you." Adrian's chest tightened. "Who?" "My kind. Yours." Zale's eyes met his, and he saw a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or something deeper. "You have bound yourself to this path, Adrian Holt. There is no turning back." Her words sent a chill through him, but he pushed the feeling aside. "Then we'll face them together," he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Zale studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Together, then," she said softly. As the distant sounds of conflict echoed through the camp, Adrian felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Whatever came next, he knew he couldn't face it alone, and for reasons he couldn't yet fully understand, he was glad he wouldn't have to. The first rays of dawn crept across the battlefield, painting the scarred landscape in hues of muted gold and ash. Dr. Adrian Holt leaned against the cold metal of the hidden alcove's wall, his mind racing as he replayed the encounter with Commander Strickland. Her parting words still hung in the air, a veiled threat that could unravel everything. In the corner, Zale stirred, her iridescent form shifting slightly under the thermal blanket he'd placed over her. Adrian's makeshift monitors hummed faintly, their readings erratic but stable enough to suggest she was recovering. Still, her presence was a risk, a ticking time bomb that could explode with a single wrong move. "Why did you do it?" Adrian murmured aloud, though he wasn't sure if he was addressing her or himself. The question had haunted him since the moment he'd carried her into the alcove. He'd told himself it was the right thing to do, that saving a life, any life, was his duty. But deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. Something about her had drawn him in, a magnetism he couldn't explain. Zale's eyes fluttered open, their silver depths catching the weak light. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, her gaze darting around the room before settling on him. "You," she began, her voice weak but steady. "You are troubled." Adrian let out a dry laugh. "That's one way to put it." He stepped closer, his hands automatically checking the readouts on her vitals. "How are you feeling?" Zale's gaze followed his movements. "Better," she said. "Your methods are unconventional, but effective." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it faded quickly. "And yet you worry. About her." Adrian frowned. "Strickland?" Zale nodded. "She is dangerous, not because she hates, but because she fears. Fear drives your kind to do terrible things." Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. Adrian thought of Strickland's eyes, cold and unyielding, and the way she had looked at Zale, as though she were nothing more than a threat to be neutralized. He'd seen that look before, in too many faces, and it never ended well. "She won't back down," Adrian said quietly. "Not unless I can convince her this isn't what she thinks it is." Zale's expression grew somber. "And what do you think this is?" Adrian hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I'm not ready to give up on the idea that there's another way, that maybe this war doesn't have to end with both sides destroying each other." For a long moment, Zale said nothing. Then she sat up slightly, wincing as pain lanced through her. Adrian moved to steady her, but she waved him off. "Your hope is naive," she said, though her tone held no malice. "But it is also rare. Perhaps that is why I am still here." Before Adrian could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the alcove. His heart leapt into his throat as he turned toward the door. A second later, it slid open to reveal a young soldier, his face pale and drawn. "Dr. Holt," the soldier said, his voice trembling. "You're needed at the command tent, now." Adrian's stomach churned. "What is it?" The soldier glanced past him, his eyes widening slightly as they landed on Zale. He quickly averted his gaze, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's Strickland. She's called an emergency council. Said it's about a security breach." Adrian's blood ran cold. "I'll be there in a minute," he said, his voice tighter than he intended. The soldier hesitated, then nodded and left. As the door slid shut, Adrian turned back to Zale. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "You have been exposed," she said simply. "Not yet," Adrian replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Stay here. Don't move. If anyone comes in—" He trailed off, his mind racing for a contingency plan. "Just stay quiet." Zale tilted her head, a faint glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "You trust me to do that?" Adrian hesitated. "I don't have a choice." Her smile returned, though it was tinged with sadness. "Then go, Adrian Holt. Face your kind, and pray they are more like you than her." The command tent was a hive of activity when Adrian arrived. Officers huddled around holographic displays, their voices low and urgent. At the center of it all stood Commander Strickland, her presence commanding even in the midst of chaos. She looked up as Adrian entered, her gaze pinning him like a predator sizing up its prey. "Dr. Holt," she said, her voice cold and clipped, "you took your time." Adrian forced himself to remain calm. I came as quickly as I could. What's going on? Strickland's eyes narrowed. Don't play dumb. We have a situation on our hands, one that you seem uniquely positioned to explain. She gestured to the holographic display, which showed a series of grainy images. Adrian's heart sank as he recognized the figure in the photos. Zale, lying unconscious near the perimeter. These were taken by a patrol drone just before it malfunctioned, Strickland said. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that our esteemed doctor had personally intervened to retrieve an enemy combatant. Care to explain yourself? Adrian's mind raced. She was injured, he said carefully. I did what any medic would do. Strickland's lip curled. Spare me the sanctimony. This isn't about medicine. It's about loyalty. You've jeopardized the safety of this entire operation by bringing her here. Adrian took a step forward, his voice rising despite himself. And what would you have me do? Leave her to die? Is that the kind of people we are now? We are at war, Strickland snapped. And in war, sentimentality gets people killed. The tension in the room was palpable. Adrian's gaze swept over the other officers, searching for any sign of support. Most avoided his eyes, their expressions unreadable. Only one, a lieutenant named Reyes, met his gaze. There was something in her eyes, not agreement but perhaps understanding. Strickland stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Adrian could hear. This is your last chance, Holt. Turn her over. Let us handle this. Adrian's jaw tightened. He thought of Zale, of the way she had looked at him with something approaching trust. He thought of the hope that had driven him to save her in the first place. And he made his choice. No, he said quietly. I can't do that. Strickland's expression darkened. Then you've left me no choice. She turned to the room. Secure the perimeter, find the alien, and bring Holt in for questioning. The air in the alcove had turned heavy, as if it carried the weight of the choice Adrian had just made. The words, find the alien, echoed in his mind like a distant, unending drumbeat. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the small medkit on the makeshift workstation. Zale's gaze followed his movements, her silver eyes steady but tinged with something he could only describe as resignation. It begins, she said quietly, her voice a soft melody against the harsh backdrop of urgency. Adrian looked up at her. I need you to trust me. Do I have a choice? She replied, her faint smile laced with irony. What is your plan, Adrian Holt? To fight them all on your own? He exhaled sharply. Not fight. Stall. He shoved the medkit into a battered canvas bag and began rummaging through the storage shelves. There's a passage through the lower tunnels. It's not mapped, not officially. I'll get you out of here. Zale tilted her head. You risk much for someone you hardly know. Adrian paused, his hands gripping the edge of the shelf. He turned to face her, his expression resolute. I know enough to believe you deserve more than being hunted down like an animal. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then Zale nodded. Lead the way. Adrian moved quickly, guiding her through the narrow corridors of the medical wing. The base was a labyrinth of steel and shadows, designed more for defense than comfort. He avoided the main paths, his every step calculated to evade the patrols he knew were already fanning out. His pulse hammered in his ears as they descended into the lower levels, the air growing colder and damp with each step. This place, Zale murmured, her voice almost reverent. It feels like it holds the echoes of your people's struggles. Adrian glanced at her, surprised by the observation. It's an old mining complex, repurposed during the early days of the war. Back then, people thought it would be over in months. And now? Now? He let out a bitter laugh. Now it's just another place where lives are spent for reasons no one remembers. Zale's eyes lingered on him, her expression unreadable. Perhaps that is why you're different. You see the cracks in the foundation. Before he could respond, the faint sound of boots echoed through the tunnels. Adrian's heart clenched. He motioned for Zale to follow him into a side passage, pressing them both against the damp stone wall. The patrol passed within meters of their hiding spot, their flashlights casting fleeting shadows that danced across the narrow space. Adrian held his breath until the last beam of light disappeared. He turned to Zale. "We need to move faster." She nodded, her movements fluid despite the lingering stiffness in her limbs. Together, they navigated deeper into the tunnels, the walls closing in around them like the maw of some ancient beast. Adrian's mind raced with every step, the stakes becoming clearer with each passing moment. Finally, they reached the hidden access point he'd been counting on. A rusted hatch partially concealed by an outcropping of rock. Adrian dropped to one knee, pulling a multi-tool from his bag. The mechanism resisted at first, but with a groan of protest, the hatch swung open to reveal a narrow shaft leading into darkness. "This will take us beyond the perimeter," Adrian said, his voice low. "Once we're out, you'll need to keep going. Don't stop for anything." Zale studied him, her expression thoughtful. "And you?" "I'll buy you as much time as I can," he replied, his tone firm. "They'll come for me, but that's better than them coming for you." She reached out, her hand brushing against his arm. "You could come with me. My people, they would understand." Adrian shook his head. "This is my fight. If I run now, everything I've done means nothing." For a moment, Zale said nothing. Then she stepped closer, her iridescent skin catching the faint light. "You have a warrior's heart, Adrian Holt, but even warriors need allies." Before he could respond, the distant sound of voices reached them. The patrols were closing in. Adrian gestured toward the shaft. "Go, now." Zale hesitated, her gaze locking with his. Then, with a nod, she slipped through the hatch and disappeared into the darkness. Adrian watched her go, his chest tightening with a mix of relief and dread. He closed the hatch behind her and turned to face the approaching threat. The echo of boots grew louder, accompanied by the harsh bark of orders. Adrian straightened, his hand instinctively tightening around the handle of the multi-tool still in his grip. When the first soldier appeared, their flashlight casting a blinding beam into the corridor, Adrian stepped forward. "Looking for me?" he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The soldier froze, their weapon raised but uncertain. Behind them, Commander Strickland's voice rang out. "Stand down, he's mine." The soldiers parted, and Strickland stepped into view. Her eyes burned with a cold fury, her posture radiating authority. "You've made a grave mistake, Holt." Adrian met her gaze, his jaw set. "Maybe, but at least I can live with it." Strickland's lips twisted into a grim smile. "We'll see about that." She raised her hand, signaling the soldiers to advance. As they closed in, Adrian took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He didn't know how this would end, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The morning sun broke over the jagged cliffs, casting fractured beams through the dense fog that hung like a shroud over the battlefield. Adrian Holt stood atop a crumbling overlook, the chill wind cutting through his fatigues. His chest heaved as he gazed down at the chaos unfolding below. Figures darted through the haze, soldiers shouting orders, the distant rumble of machinery, and the occasional burst of weapon fire. The scene was eerily familiar, yet different in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "She's gone, you know," came a voice from behind him. Adrian turned to find Lieutenant Reyes approaching. Her face was set with grim determination, but her eyes betrayed the weight she carried. She stopped a few paces away, folding her arms. "Strickland knows you helped her escape. The entire command is in uproar," Reyes continued. "It's only a matter of time before they corner you." Adrian's gaze flicked back to the horizon. "Then why are you here?" Reyes hesitated. "Because maybe you're not as crazy as they think, and maybe I'm tired of pretending this war is going to fix anything." A faint smile tugged at Adrian's lips. "You're risking a lot by coming here." "Not as much as you," she countered, "but that's why I'm here. Strickland's planning to launch a full assault on the perimeter." She's convinced Zale's people are mounting an attack, and she's using this as an excuse to escalate. Adrian's stomach sank. They'll retaliate. This will turn into a bloodbath. Exactly, Reyes said. And you're the only one who can stop it. Adrian shook his head. What do you expect me to do? Strickland's already made up her mind. Reyes stepped closer, her voice low. There's a way. The communication array in the East Tower. You could broadcast a message to both sides. Make them see reason before it's too late. Adrian stared at her, the weight of the suggestion settling over him. That's a suicide mission. The tower's heavily guarded. Then don't get caught, Reyes said simply. She reached into her pocket and handed him a small data drive. This has the codes to access the array. You'll need to move fast. Adrian took the drive, his fingers brushing against hers. For a moment, their eyes met, unspoken understanding passing between them. Good luck, Holt, Reyes said, stepping back. Whatever happens, make it count. The East Tower loomed like a monolith against the bleak sky, its spire piercing the clouds. Adrian crept along the shadowed perimeter, his breath coming in shallow bursts. Every step brought him closer to the guards patrolling the base of the structure, their movements precise and unyielding. He paused behind a stack of supply crates, his mind racing. The tower's defenses were formidable, but not insurmountable. He glanced at the small device Reyes had given him, its faint glow a reminder of the precarious hope he carried. A distraction. He needed a distraction. Adrian scanned the area, his eyes landing on a generator humming softly nearby. He darted toward it, his movements fluid and silent. With a few quick adjustments, he set a timer on the device's control panel and retreated to a safe distance. The explosion was small but effective, sending a plume of smoke and debris into the air. Shouts erupted as the guards scrambled to investigate. Adrian seized the opportunity, slipping past the chaos and into the tower. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machinery. The corridors were narrow, lined with conduits and flickering lights. Adrian moved quickly, his every step measured. He could feel the weight of the codes in his pocket, their significance pressing against his mind. The control room was near the top of the tower, accessible only by a winding staircase. As he ascended, his thoughts drifted to Zale. Was she safe? Had she made it far enough to escape the reach of Strickland's wrath? He pushed the questions aside, focusing on the task at hand. When he reached the control room, the sight of the massive array console took his breath away. It was a marvel of engineering, its surface covered in glowing interfaces and intricate circuitry. Adrian approached it cautiously, inserting the data drive into the central terminal. The system whirred to life, its screen displaying a series of prompts. "Come on," Adrian muttered, his fingers flying across the controls. He accessed the communication network, bypassing security protocols with the codes Reyes had provided. A crackling sound filled the room as the array connected to the global frequencies. He took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the transmit button. This was it, his chance to make a difference, to be more than just a cog in the machine of war. "This is Dr. Adrian Holt," he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "To anyone listening, this war doesn't have to end in annihilation. We have a choice. I've seen the enemy and they're not what we think they are. They're people, like us, and if we keep fighting, we'll lose everything that makes us human." As his words echoed across the frequencies, the door to the control room burst open. Strickland stood there, flanked by armed guards. Her eyes blazed with fury, her weapon trained on him. "Shut it down," she commanded. Adrian shook his head. "Number I can't." Strickland advanced, her finger tightening on the trigger. "You're a traitor, Holt. You think this will change anything? You're a fool." "Maybe," Adrian said, his voice calm. "But at least I'm trying." The room filled with tension as Strickland's weapon remained fixed on him. Then, without warning, Reyes appeared behind her, her own weapon drawn. "Stand down, Commander," Reyes said, her voice firm. Strickland hesitated, her grip faltering. Adrian took the opportunity to hit the final transmit command. The array hummed, as his message was broadcast to the world. Strickland's shoulders slumped as the weight of what had happened settled over her. She lowered her weapon, her expression unreadable. "You've doomed us all," she muttered. Adrian stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Number, I've given us a chance." As the array powered down, a sense of quiet resolve filled the room. The battle outside began to still, the echoes of Adrian's words rippling through the air. For the first time in years, hope flickered amidst the shadows.